Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the journey ahead. My name is Theodore Harrison, and at 65 years old, I thought I knew what rock bottom looked like. I was wrong. Rock bottom is coming home from what you thought was just another day at the office to find your entire life scattered across your front lawn like garbage on collection day. It was a Tuesday in October when I pulled into my driveway and saw them. My clothes, my books, my trophies from 30 years of selling insurance, my favorite recliner, even my coffee mug collection that Linda had always complained about. Everything I owned was spread across the grass like some twisted yard sale where nothing was for sale and everything was just discarded. For a moment, I just sat in my car, engine still running, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe Linda was spring cleaning. Maybe she was reorganizing. Maybe there was some logical explanation for why my leather jacket was hanging from the mailbox like a scarecrow. Then I saw the piece of paper taped to the front door. Even from the car, I could see my son Michael's handwriting, that careful script his mother had taught him when he was 7 years old. The same writing that had signed Father's Day cards and graduation thank you notes for 35 years. I got out of the car on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Each step toward that door felt like walking through quicksand. The October wind was picking up, and I watched my favorite tie, the blue one with tiny anchors that Michael had given me for my 60th birthday, flutter from the oak tree like a surrender flag. The note was short, devastating in its brevity. "Dad, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. I can't watch you destroy yourself and take Mom with you. I've tried to help. We all have, but you won't listen. You won't change. I've changed the locks. Please don't try to contact us until you get the help you need. Michael." I read it 3 times before the words sank in. 4 times before I understood that my son, my boy who used to climb into my lap to hear bedtime stories, who'd called me his hero at his high school graduation, had just kicked me out of my own life. I tried my key anyway. Of course it didn't work. The lock had been changed, just like the note said. I stood there on my own front porch, a 65-year-old man locked out of the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 28 years, and felt something inside my chest crack like thin ice. The neighbors were starting to notice. Mrs. Chen from next door was peeking through her curtains, probably wondering why Ted Harrison was standing on his porch like a lost tourist. The Wilson kids were riding their bikes on the sidewalk, slowing down to stare at the strange spectacle of a grown man's life exploded across a suburban lawn. I walked back to my car, my feet crunching on fallen leaves and the remnants of what used to be my normal life. That's when I saw it. My wedding photo, the one that had sat on the mantel for 37 years, lying face down in a puddle from yesterday's rain. Linda's face was water-stained but still smiling, still beautiful in that white dress I'd saved 3 months' salary to afford. I picked up the photo and wiped it clean with my sleeve. In the picture, Linda was looking at me like I hung the moon and stars just for her. When was the last time she'd looked at me that way? When was the last time anyone in my family had looked at me with anything other than disappointment, frustration, or barely contained anger? The truth was, I couldn't remember. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching my house like it might suddenly make sense again. The lights were on in the kitchen. Linda was probably making dinner for herself and Michael. Maybe Danny, my 12-year-old grandson, was doing homework at the kitchen table like he did every Tuesday. Life was going on inside that house. My family was continuing their routines, and I was sitting in the driveway like a stranger. That's when it hit me. I was a stranger. Somewhere along the way, without me even noticing, I'd become a stranger in my own family, a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed, a disappointment to be endured. But what had I done? What terrible crime had I committed that warranted this complete exile from everything I'd worked 37 years to build? My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. "Ted, please just go. Don't make this harder than it already is. We love you, but we can't live with you anymore. We love you, but we can't live with you anymore." The words cut deeper than any blade could have, because they meant that whatever I'd done, whatever I'd become, it was bad enough to make the people who loved me choose to live without me, rather than continue trying to save me. I started the car and backed out of the driveway, watching my house, my home, disappear in the rearview mirror. I had nowhere to go, no plan, no understanding of how my life had fallen apart so completely that my own son would rather throw me away than keep trying to fix me. As I drove aimlessly through the streets of the neighborhood where I'd lived for nearly 3 decades, past the houses of friends who probably already knew what had happened, past the school where I'd dropped Michael off 1,000 times, past the park where I'd taught him to throw a baseball, I realized something terrifying. I had no idea who Theodore Harrison really was anymore. I'd been sleepwalking through my own life for so long that I'd lost track of the man I'd become. And apparently that man was someone so toxic, so destructive, so impossible to live with, that his own family would rather rip their hearts out than keep him around. The question that would haunt me for the next few months was simple but devastating. What had I done to become someone my family couldn't love enough to save? And more importantly, was it too late to find out? You want to know how a man becomes a stranger to his own family? It doesn't happen overnight. It's like rust on a car. It starts small, invisible, eating away at the foundation until one day you realize the whole structure is compromised. Looking back now, I can see exactly when the rust started forming on my life, but at the time, I thought I was just being a good husband and father. It was 1987 when Linda and I bought the house on Maple Street. Michael was just 2 years old then, a chubby-cheeked toddler who called me Dada, and thought I could fix anything with my toolbox and a kiss on whatever hurt. We were young, optimistic, drowning in mortgage payments, but convinced we were building something beautiful together. I was 28, working for Hartwell Insurance as a junior agent, making barely enough to cover the bills, but determined to provide for my family the way my father never had for us. Linda was 25, gorgeous as a movie star, working part-time as a dental hygienist, while Michael napped. We had plans, big plans. I was going to be the top salesman in the state. We were going to pay off the house early. Michael was going to go to any college he wanted without worrying about money. Those early years were good ones. Really good. I remember coming home from work to find Linda in the kitchen, Michael playing with wooden blocks on the floor, the smell of pot roast filling the house like a warm hug. I remember weekend mornings when Michael would crawl into our bed between Linda and me, and we'd lie there making plans for the day. Maybe a trip to the zoo, maybe just playing in the backyard. "You're going to be such a good dad," Linda used to tell me, running her fingers through my hair while Michael slept between us. "He's so lucky to have you." I believed her. God help me. I really believed her. The insurance business was tough, especially in those early days. Rejection was a daily reality. Cold calls that ended with dial tones, appointments that turned into lectures about why people didn't need coverage, sales that fell through at the last minute. But I was hungry, determined, willing to work longer hours than anyone else in the office. "Success in insurance is about persistence," my manager Bob Hartwell used to say. "The guy who makes one more call, visits one more prospect, stays 1 hour later, that's the guy who builds an empire." So that's what I did. I made one more call. I visited one more prospect. I stayed 1 hour later. Then 2 hours, then 3. I worked Saturdays while other fathers were at their kids' soccer games. I made calls during dinner while Linda tried to manage a toddler who wanted Daddy's attention. I brought files home and spread them across the kitchen table while my family ate around my paperwork. "Ted," Linda said one evening when Michael was about 4, "he asked me today why other daddies come to the playground but you don't." I looked up from a client proposal I was reviewing. "What did you tell him?" "I told him Daddy works very hard to take care of us, but Ted, he's only 4. He doesn't understand why work is more important than pushing him on the swings." "It's not more important," I said, though I didn't stop working on the proposal. "I'm doing this for him, for both of you, so we can have nice things, so he can go to good schools, so you don't have to worry about money." Linda was quiet for a moment. What if we worried a little more about money and you worried a little less about work? I should have listened to her. God, I should have listened to her. But Bob Hartwell was promoting me to senior agent, and the commission potential was huge, and I was so close to breaking into the six-figure income bracket that would change everything for our family. By the time Michael started school, I was one of the top salesmen in the region. We'd paid off Linda's car, upgraded to a bigger house, started a college fund that was growing steadily. I was providing for my family in ways my own father never could have imagined. I was winning. But Michael stopped asking me to read him bedtime stories because I was always on the phone with West Coast clients. Linda stopped waiting up for me because I was always at networking events or client dinners. I was succeeding at everything except the things that actually mattered. "Dad, will you come to my baseball game Saturday?" Michael asked one morning when he was 8. He was wearing his Little League uniform, looking so proud of those baggy pants and oversized cap. "I'll try, buddy," I said, already knowing I couldn't make it. I had a presentation to a major corporate client that could land me the biggest commission of my career. "You always say you'll try," Michael said, and there was something in his voice. Not anger, not disappointment, just a kind of resignation that broke my heart and made me defensive at the same time. "Michael, Daddy works hard so you can play baseball," I said. "So you can have those cleats, that glove, those lessons with Coach Rodriguez. Someone has to pay for those things." He nodded like he understood. But he was 8 years old. He didn't understand that I was sacrificing time with him so I could afford to give him opportunities. He just knew that other dads showed up and his dad didn't. Linda was in the kitchen when Michael left for school. She was staring out the window, her coffee getting cold in her hands. "He stopped asking for you," she said without turning around. "What do you mean? At first, he used to ask every day when you'd be home, when you could play with him, when you could help with his homework. Then he started asking every few days. Now he doesn't ask at all." I moved behind her and put my hands on her shoulders. "Linda, I'm building something here. I'm building security for our family. In a few more years, I'll have enough saved that I can cut back on the hours, spend more time at home." She leaned back against me, and for a moment I thought everything was going to be okay. Then she said something that should have been a wake-up call, but instead made me angry. "Ted, what if a few more years is too late? What if by the time you decide to come home, we've already learned how to live without you?" I pulled away from her. "That's not fair, Linda. I'm doing this for you and Michael." "No," she said, turning to face me with tears in her eyes. "You're doing this for you. Because being successful at work is easier than being present at home. Because clients think you're wonderful, but your family just expects you to show up." The fight that followed was our first real fight. The kind where words get said that can't be taken back. I accused her of not appreciating my sacrifices. She accused me of hiding behind work to avoid being a real husband and father. We both said things designed to hurt, and we succeeded. But I was making more money than ever. I was getting recognition from corporate headquarters. I was being invited to speak at regional conferences. By every measure that mattered in the business world, I was a tremendous success. The problem was that those were the only measures I was paying attention to. By the time Michael turned 10, I'd missed so many games, school events, and family dinners that Linda stopped telling me about them. By the time he turned 12, he'd stopped asking if I was coming to anything. By the time he turned 15, he'd stopped talking to me about anything more substantial than the weather, and I told myself it was normal. Teenagers pull away from their parents. It's natural. It's healthy. I was providing for him, setting an example of hard work and dedication. He'd understand when he was older. But sitting in my car that October evening, looking at my life scattered across the lawn like trash, I realized that Michael was 35 years old now. He was older, and what he understood was that his father had chosen work over family for so many years that there wasn't much family left to choose. The rust had been eating away at my foundation for decades, and I'd been too busy counting commission checks to notice that the whole structure was about to collapse. Now it had. and I was sitting in my car, homeless and alone, finally understanding what Linda had tried to tell me 27 years ago, that by the time I decided to come home, my family had already learned how to live without me. The question was whether it was too late to learn how to live without work being the most important thing in my life. The Riverside Motel was the kind of place where people stayed when they'd run out of better options. $49 a night, free coffee in the lobby that tasted like it had been brewing since the Carter administration, and a neon sign that flickered between vacancy and vacancy, depending on which letters felt like working that day. I'd been living there for a week, and I was starting to understand the rhythm of rock bottom. You wake up at dawn because the walls are thin and the guy next door watches infomercials at full volume. You drink the terrible coffee because it's free and you're trying to stretch every dollar. You avoid eye contact with the other residents because you're all there for the same reason. Life had chewed you up and spit you out. My room was on the second floor, overlooking the parking lot, where 18-wheelers idled all night and working girls conducted business with the casual efficiency of any other trade. Room 237. I'd memorized that number like it was my new address, which I supposed it was. Everything I owned now fit into 3 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. 37 years of marriage, 35 years of fatherhood, 40 years of adult life, and it all reduced to what I could carry up a flight of stairs that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. But it was the small things that were killing me. The fact that I didn't know how to make coffee for one person. I'd been making a full pot for decades. Enough for Linda and me, sometimes Michael when he stayed over with Danny. The way my phone never rang anymore, because everyone who used to call me was part of the life I'd been locked out of. I tried calling Michael that first week, every day, sometimes twice a day. The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service. He'd changed his number. My own son had changed his phone number to avoid talking to me. The rejection of it, the finality of it, hit me like a physical blow every time I heard that recorded message. I tried calling Linda. Same message. I drove by the house twice that first week, like a stalker in my own neighborhood. Both times, Michael's car was in the driveway. He was staying there, probably to protect Linda from me, probably to make sure I didn't try to force my way back into their lives. The second time I drove by, Mrs. Chen was outside watering her roses. She saw me slow down and look at the house, and the expression on her face, pity mixed with embarrassment. Like she'd caught me masturbating in public, made me speed up and not come back. That's when the memories started coming. Not the big moments, not the obvious failures, but the small things I dismissed at the time as unimportant. The accumulation of tiny betrayals that had slowly poisoned my family against me. Michael's 8th grade graduation. I'd promised to be there, but Marcus Wellington, a potential client worth hundreds of thousands in annual premiums, had called that morning wanting to meet. It's just 8th grade, I'd told Linda. It's not like it's high school graduation. I'd missed watching my son receive the principal's award for academic excellence because I was in a restaurant trying to convince Marcus Wellington that term life insurance was a smart investment. Linda's 40th birthday. I'd planned to take her to dinner at Chez Laurent, the fancy French place she'd been wanting to try for months. But the Peterson account was imploding, and if I didn't drive to Cleveland that weekend to do damage control, I'd lose a client worth $60,000 a year in commission. "We can celebrate next weekend," I'd told her. "It's just a number, right? You'll still be 40 next weekend." Next weekend, she'd smiled and said she understood, but something had gone out of her eyes. Some light had dimmed that never quite came back to full brightness. Michael's first varsity football game. He'd made the team as a sophomore, not starting but on the roster, wearing number 73 and prouder than if he'd won the Heisman Trophy. "Dad, you have to come," he'd said. "Coach says family support is what makes champions." But the regional insurance conference was that same Friday night, and Bob Hartwell had specifically asked me to give the keynote speech on building client relationships in the digital age. It was a huge honor, a career-defining moment. "I'll make the next game, son," I'd promised. "This is really important for my career." "What about my career?" Michael had asked quietly. "Your career is school," I'd said. "Football is just for fun." He'd nodded and walked away, but I'd seen something die in his face. Some hope, some expectation, some faith in his father that had withered like a plant that hadn't been watered in too long. Sitting in that motel room, eating gas station sandwiches and watching basic cable, I started making a list. Not a mental list, but an actual list on paper. Every important family moment I'd missed for work. Every promise I'd broken because something more important had come up. Every time I'd chosen career advancement over being present for the people who loved me. The list was 14 pages long. 14 pages of birthdays, graduations, recitals, games, school events, anniversaries, holidays, and ordinary Tuesday nights when my family had needed me and I'd been somewhere else, building my empire of success that nobody gave a damn about except me. Danny's birth. I'd been in the delivery room for the actual birth, barely, racing from a client meeting that had run late. But while Linda was holding her first grandchild and Michael was becoming a father, I was on my phone in the hospital corridor, returning calls that could have waited until Monday. Michael's wedding. I'd walked him down the aisle after his father-in-law, who'd become more of a father figure to him than I had. During the reception, while families mingled and celebrated, I was outside taking a call from a client in California who was considering switching insurance companies. "It'll just take 5 minutes," I told Linda. It took 40 minutes, and by the time I came back inside, the father-son dance was over. He danced with Linda, someone told me later, since you weren't around. Linda's cancer scare. 3 years ago, she'd found a lump in her breast and had to have it biopsied. She'd asked me to come with her to get the results. "Ted, I'm scared," she'd said. "I need you there." But I'd scheduled a presentation to the Morrison Group that same afternoon, a potential client worth more money than I'd ever pitched before. "Honey, you said yourself the doctor didn't seem worried," I'd reasoned. "It's probably nothing. I'll make it up to you tonight with a nice dinner." The lump was benign, thank God, but Michael had been the one holding his mother's hand when she got the good news. Michael had been the one who took her to celebrate afterward. Michael had been the son who showed up when his mother was scared, while her husband was in a conference room explaining the benefits of whole life insurance to people who forgot his name the moment he left the building. That night in the motel, I called information and got the number for Hartwell Insurance. It was after hours, but I knew the night cleaning crew would be there. When Maria answered, I asked her to transfer me to voicemail. "Bob, it's Ted Harrison. I'm taking some personal time. Family emergency. I'll be out indefinitely. Handle my accounts however you need to." I hung up and turned off my phone. For the first time in 37 years, I wasn't thinking about work. I wasn't planning my next sales call or strategizing about client retention or calculating commission potential. I was thinking about an 8-year-old boy in a baseball uniform who'd stopped asking his daddy to come watch him play. I was thinking about a wife who'd learned to celebrate her birthday alone because her husband had more important things to do. I was thinking about a son who'd changed his phone number because he couldn't stand to hear his father's voice anymore. And I was wondering if there was any way to undo 30 years of choosing everything else over the people who mattered most. Outside my window, the motel's neon sign flickered from vacancy to vacancy and back again, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to say. I knew exactly how it felt. On day 10 at the Riverside Motel, I made the mistake of looking at myself in the bathroom mirror, really looking, not just the quick glance you give when you're brushing your teeth or combing your hair. I stood there in my underwear and t-shirt, staring at the stranger who'd apparently taken over my body while I wasn't paying attention. When had I gotten so soft around the middle? When had my hair gotten so thin on top that I could see scalp through the strands? When had those lines appeared around my eyes? Those jowls that made me look like my father in his final years. I was 65, but I looked older. I looked tired. I looked like a man who'd been running towards something for so long that he'd forgotten to take care of himself along the way. But it wasn't just the physical appearance that shocked me. It was the emptiness behind my eyes. I'd spent so many years projecting confidence, competence, success that I'd forgotten what I actually looked like when no one was watching. And what I looked like was hollow, like a man who'd built a beautiful house, but forgotten to put anything inside it. That afternoon, I decided to drive to Michael's workplace, not to confront him, not to make a scene, but just to see him, just to remind myself that I had a son, that somewhere in this city was a piece of my heart walking around in the world. Michael worked for Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm downtown. I knew this because I'd helped him get the job 12 years ago, not through nepotism, but through networking. One of my insurance clients, Jim Henderson, had mentioned needing a good junior accountant, and I'd put in a word for Michael. At the time, I'd thought I was being a good father, using my business connections to help my son's career. Now I realized it was probably the last meaningful thing I'd done for him. I parked across the street from his building at 5:30, figuring that's when he'd come out. At 5:45, I saw him walking through the lobby toward the exit, 35 years old, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him well. Carrying a leather briefcase I'd given him for Christmas 3 years ago, he looked successful, confident, like a man who had his life together. He looked like me at that age, but better somehow, more centered, more present in his own life. I watched him walk to his car, a sensible Honda Accord, not flashy, but reliable. He was checking his phone, probably texting Sarah about picking up Danny from soccer practice or stopping by the grocery store. The ordinary rhythms of family life that I'd been too busy to participate in for decades. Just as he was about to get in his car, his phone rang. I watched him answer it, watched his face light up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Hey, buddy," he said, and even from across the street I could hear the warmth in his voice. "How was school today, Danny?" He was talking to Danny, my 12-year-old grandson, who barely knew I existed because his grandfather had been too important. Too busy, too focused on building a legacy that nobody wanted to inherit. I watched Michael lean against his car, completely absorbed in conversation with his son. He was asking about homework, about friends, about something that had happened at lunch that made him laugh out loud. He was being present, engaged, interested in the details of a 12-year-old's life in a way I'd never been with Michael. "Tell Mom I'll pick up dinner on the way home," Michael said. "Chinese, okay? Your choice of restaurant." A pause. "Yeah, we can get extra egg rolls, but you have to eat some vegetables too, deal?" The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes, but watching it was like seeing a master class in how to be a father. Michael wasn't distracted, wasn't thinking about work or clients or anything else. For those 5 minutes, his son was the most important thing in his universe. When he hung up, Michael stood by his car for a moment, just smiling. The smile of a man who was looking forward to going home, to seeing his family, to sharing dinner and homework help and bedtime stories. The smile of a man who understood what actually mattered in life. I'd never smiled like that. Not once in 35 years of being a father had I felt that pure anticipation about going home to my family. Home had always been the place I went after the important stuff was finished. Family time had been the dessert after the meal of real life, which was work and clients and building something impressive that other people would admire. Michael got in his car and drove away, probably heading to pick up Chinese food for his family. I sat in my car and cried like a baby, mourning not just what I'd lost, but what I'd never had in the first place. I'd never experienced the joy of putting my family first. I'd never felt that excited about going home. I'd never been the kind of father who made his kid laugh over the phone about something that happened at lunch. I'd been so busy providing for my family that I'd forgotten to actually be part of it. That evening, back in my motel room, I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I called my own father. He was 88 now, living in a retirement home in Phoenix, and we talked maybe twice a year, usually on his birthday and Christmas. "Theodore," his voice was thin, confused. "Why are you calling? Is something wrong?" Even to my own father, I was someone who only called when something was wrong. "Dad, I wanted to ask you something. About when I was growing up, do you remember being happy to come home from work?" There was a long pause. That's a strange question, son. Why do you ask? Do you remember looking forward to seeing Mom and me? Do you remember being excited about family time? Another pause, longer this time. Theodore, I worked hard to provide for you and your mother. That was my job. Being happy about it wasn't part of the equation. But did you ever regret it? All the hours at the factory? All the overtime? All the weekends you worked instead of spending time with us? Regret it. His voice got stronger, more defensive. Boy, everything you accomplished, everything you built, was because I worked my ass off to give you opportunities I never had. You think regret pays for college? You think regret puts food on the table? I could hear my own voice in his words. How many times had I said almost exactly the same thing to Linda, to Michael? How many times had I defended my absence by pointing to my financial contributions? Dad, do you remember teaching me to throw a baseball? I bought you a glove and a ball. Do you remember helping me with homework? I paid for tutors when you needed them. Do you remember talking to me? Just talking about life, about what I was thinking, about who I was becoming. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Theodore, he said finally, what's this really about? I told him. About coming home to find my life on the lawn. About the note from Michael. About living in a motel and watching my son be the kind of father I'd never been. So you're calling me to blame me for your problems, Dad said when I finished. You're saying this is my fault because I worked hard to give you a better life. No, Dad. I'm calling to understand how this happened, how we both became men who confused providing with loving, how we both thought showing up with money was the same as just showing up. He was quiet for a moment. Then, your mother used to say something like that. She used to say I was a good provider but a lousy husband. What did you tell her? I told her she was ungrateful. I told her she didn't understand what it took to make it in the world. His voice got softer. Maybe she understood better than I did. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my motel bed and realized that I'd inherited more than just my father's work ethic. I'd inherited his blindness, his inability to see that success without connection is just expensive loneliness. 3 generations of Harrison men, all of us working ourselves to death to provide for families we were too busy to actually know. All of us proud of our financial accomplishments and baffled by our emotional failures. The cycle had to stop somewhere. It had to stop with me. But first, I had to figure out how to become the kind of man who could break it. I had to learn how to be someone worth coming home to, someone who brought joy instead of just money, someone who understood that being a good father meant more than just paying the bills. I had to learn how to be present in my own life. The question was, at 65 years old, was it too late to learn? It was Danny who broke the ice. Though he didn't know it at the time, I'd been living at the Riverside Motel for 3 weeks when I saw him at Murphy's Market, the little grocery store on 5th Street, where Linda used to send me for milk and bread when I actually lived like a normal human being. I was buying instant coffee and frozen dinners, the cuisine of the dispossessed, when I heard a familiar voice in the cereal aisle. Mom said I could pick 1 sugary cereal, but only 1, and it has to last the whole week. I peered around the corner and there he was, Danny, 12 years old, all elbows and knees, standing on his tiptoes to reach a box of Lucky Charms on the top shelf. Sarah was with him, my daughter-in-law, looking tired but patient, in the way mothers do when they're grocery shopping with kids after a long day. Danny was my grandson, but I barely knew him. I'd missed so many of his birthdays, school events, and growing up moments that he was basically a stranger who happened to share my DNA. The last real conversation I'd had with him was probably when he was 8, and even then it had been interrupted by a phone call from a client. I should have walked away, should have finished my shopping and left them in peace, but something about watching Danny struggle to reach that cereal box broke something loose in my chest. Before I could think better of it, I walked over. "Need some help, buddy?" Danny turned around and for a moment he just stared at me like he was trying to place my face. Then recognition dawned, followed immediately by confusion. "Grandpa Ted?" He looked over at Sarah, who'd gone pale as a sheet. "Mom, it's Grandpa Ted." Sarah's face cycled through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, fear, anger, and something that might have been pity. "Danny, go get a cart from the front of the store." "Okay, I need to talk to Grandpa for a minute." Danny looked back and forth between us, sensing the tension but not understanding it. "But what about my cereal?" I reached up and grabbed the Lucky Charms, handing them to him with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Here you go, buddy." "Thanks." "Grandpa." He took the box and looked at me with those big brown eyes that reminded me of Michael at that age. "Are you coming to my soccer game on Saturday? Dad said you might not be able to make it, but I thought maybe—" The hope in his voice was like a knife to the heart. I don't know about Saturday." "No." "Danny?" "Oh." His face fell. "Okay, I'll go get that cart." He walked away, shoulders slumped in a way that was heartbreakingly familiar. How many times had I seen Michael walk away with that same disappointed posture? Sarah waited until Danny was out of earshot before she spoke. "Ted, what are you doing here?" "Buying groceries." "Same as you." "You know what I mean?" Her voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath. "Michael told me what happened. He told me about the locks, about you being wherever you're staying now. The Riverside Motel, if you're curious." She winced. "Ted, I'm not going to pretend I understand everything that's going on with you and Michael and Linda, but I am going to ask you not to put Danny in the middle of it." I wasn't trying to put him in the middle of anything. I was trying to help him reach a cereal box. And now he's going to ask me why Grandpa can't come to his soccer game. He's going to ask why you look like you haven't slept in weeks. He's going to ask questions I can't answer because I don't understand the answers myself. I looked down at my cart. Instant coffee, frozen dinners, a 6-pack of beer, and a bag of stale donuts. The shopping cart of a man whose life had completely fallen apart. "Sarah, can I ask you something? And I want you to be honest." She nodded warily. "What has Michael told Danny about me? About why I'm not around anymore?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "He told him that Grandpa is going through a difficult time and needs some space to figure things out. That sometimes adults need time to work on themselves before they can be good family members again." "And what does Danny think about that?" "He thinks you don't love him anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "He asked me last week if he did something wrong, if that's why Grandpa doesn't come around anymore. He said maybe if he was better at baseball, or if he got better grades, or if he was funnier, maybe you'd want to see him." I had to grab the edge of the shopping cart to keep from falling down. My 12-year-old grandson thought I'd abandoned him because he wasn't good enough. He was blaming himself for my failures. "Sarah, you have to tell him that's not true. You have to tell him that none of this is his fault." I did tell him that. "But Ted, kids don't listen to what adults say. They watch what adults do. And what you've done is disappear from his life without explanation. Because his father threw me out of the house. Because you gave his father no choice." Sarah's voice rose, then she caught herself and looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Ted, I've been married to Michael for 8 years. I've watched him try to have a relationship with you. I've watched him invite you to things you never show up for, call you back after conversations where you clearly weren't listening, make excuses for you to Danny when you promised to do things and then cancel at the last minute." She paused, collecting herself. "Michael didn't throw you out because he stopped loving you. He threw you out because loving you was killing him." "I don't understand." "He spent 35 years trying to be good enough to get your attention. 35 years thinking that if he just achieved enough, accomplished enough, made you proud enough, maybe you'd actually want to spend time with him. And when Danny was born, he swore he'd never do that to his son. He swore he'd be present, available, interested in Danny's life." Sarah's eyes were wet now, but her voice was steady. "But watching you ignore Danny the same way you ignored him, it was breaking his heart all over again. So he made a choice. He chose to protect his son from the same disappointment he lived with his entire childhood." I stood there in the cereal aisle of Murphy's Market, surrounded by colorful boxes promising nutritious starts to the day, and felt the full weight of what I'd done to my family. Not just the big things, the missed events, the broken promises, the endless phone calls during family time, but the small things too. The way I'd made my own son feel like he had to earn my love. The way I'd made my grandson think he wasn't worth my time. "Sarah," I said quietly, "what would it take? What would it take for Michael to let me see Danny again?" She looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding whether I was worth the truth. "Proof," she said finally. "Proof of what?" "Proof that you've changed. Not promises, not explanations, not apologies. Proof. Real, demonstrable evidence that you understand what you did wrong and that you're genuinely different now." "How do I prove that?" "I don't know, Ted, but I know what won't work. Grand gestures won't work. Expensive gifts won't work. Showing up at his soccer games and expecting everything to be normal won't work." She paused. "You spent 35 years teaching Michael that work was more important than family. If you want him to believe something different, you're going to have to show him something different." Danny came back with the shopping cart, looking between us with the sharp intuition kids have for adult tension. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice immediately warm and reassuring. "Grandpa was just asking about your soccer game." Danny's face lit up. "I'm playing midfielder now. Coach says I have good field vision." He looked at me hopefully. "Maybe you could come watch sometime." I looked into those brown eyes, so much like Michael's at that age, so full of hope and trust that adults would do what they promised, and made a decision. "Danny, I can't come to your game this Saturday, but I want you to know it's not because of anything you did. It's because Grandpa needs to work on being a better person before he can be a good grandfather." Danny's face scrunched up in confusion. "What does that mean?" "It means that when I do come to one of your games, I want to be the kind of grandpa who deserves to be there. The kind who pays attention and cheers for you and remembers everything about how you played." "Will that take a long time?" I looked at Sarah, who was watching this conversation with something that might have been approval. "I hope not, buddy. I really hope not." As they walked away, Danny turned back once and waved. A simple gesture that contained more hope and forgiveness than I deserved. That night in my motel room, I did something I should have done 30 years ago. I made a list of everything I needed to change about myself to become the kind of man my family could trust again. The list was longer than I expected, but for the first time since I'd found my belongings on the front lawn, I felt something other than despair. I felt possibility. The list I made that night had 43 items on it, 43 specific ways I'd failed my family, 43 habits I needed to break, 43 changes I needed to make if I wanted to become someone worth loving again. Some of the items were obvious. Stop taking phone calls during family time. Don't schedule work events on birthdays or anniversaries. Show up when you say you will. Basic human decency stuff that I'd somehow forgotten along the way. Others cut deeper. Learn to have conversations that aren't about work. Ask questions about their lives and actually listen to the answers. Remember that being a provider is not the same as being a father. But it was item number 17 that broke me. Stop making Michael feel like he has to earn my love. I'd written it almost without thinking, but seeing it on paper made me realize the horrible truth. For 35 years, I'd treated my son's affection like a business transaction. Good grades earned approval. Athletic achievements earned pride. Professional success earned respect. But unconditional love, the kind of love a father should give his son just for existing, that I'd never learned how to offer, because my own father had never offered it to me. The next morning, I did something that would have been unthinkable just a month before. I called Bob Hartwell and quit my job. "Ted, what the hell are you talking about?" Bob's voice crackled through my cheap motel phone. "You can't quit. You're my top producer. You've got the Morrison account presentation next week, the Henderson renewal coming up, the Peterson Group expansion. Give them to Rodriguez," I said. "Or Miller. They're good salesmen. They'll handle it." But not like you would, Ted. You're having some kind of midlife crisis here. Take a vacation, take a leave of absence, but don't throw away everything you've built. Everything I've built. The phrase that had motivated me for 40 years suddenly sounded hollow. Bob, what have I built really? I've built a client list. I've built a reputation. I've built a commission structure, but I haven't built a family. I haven't built relationships with people who actually matter. I've built a career and lost everything else in the process. Ted, you're not thinking clearly. Not. Your wife will come around, kids get over their tantrums, but if you walk away from Hartwell Insurance, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Maybe, but I already regret the life I've lived for the past 37 years. At least this way, I'll regret something I chose instead of something I just let happen. I hung up and immediately felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there. For the first time since I was 25 years old, I wasn't an insurance salesman. I wasn't anyone's employee. I wasn't building toward some quarterly goal or annual target. I was just Theodore Harrison, a 65-year-old man with no job, no family, and no plan except to become someone worth knowing. The freedom was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. That afternoon, I drove to St. Matthew's Catholic Church. I wasn't Catholic. Linda and I had been non-denominational Christians when we bothered with church at all, but St. Matthew's was the closest church to the motel, and I needed to talk to someone who might understand redemption. Father Martinez was probably 50, with kind eyes and the soft belly of a man who'd been invited to too many parish dinners. He found me sitting in the back pew, staring at the stained glass windows and trying to remember the last time I'd prayed for something other than a big commission check. "Can I help you, son?" Son. When was the last time anyone had called me son? Father, I'm not Catholic. I'm not even sure I'm much of a Christian anymore, but I need to talk to someone about how to become a better man. He sat down beside me without asking permission, the way people do when they're comfortable with broken souls seeking guidance. "What makes you think you need to become a better man?" I told him everything. About the note on the door, about Michael changing his phone number, about Danny thinking I didn't love him anymore, about 37 years of choosing work over family and wondering if it was too late to choose differently. Father Martinez listened without judgment, nodding occasionally, asking gentle questions that helped me dig deeper into the truth of what I'd done to the people I loved. "Theodore," he said when I finished, "do you believe in forgiveness?" "I want to. But Father, how do you forgive someone who spent decades hurting you? How do you trust someone who's shown you over and over that other things matter more to them than you do?" Those are good questions, but I wasn't asking about their forgiveness. I was asking about God's forgiveness. Do you believe God can forgive what you've done? I thought about it. Maybe. But what difference does that make if my family can't? It makes all the difference in the world, because God's forgiveness gives you permission to become someone new. It gives you permission to stop being defined by your mistakes and start being defined by your choices going forward. He paused, looking at the cross hanging above the altar. "Theodore, your family may never forgive you. That's their choice to make, and you can't control it, but you can control who you become from this moment forward. You can choose to be the man you wish you'd been all along." How do I do that? How do I change 40 years of habits, 40 years of priorities, 40 years of being someone I'm ashamed of? One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of putting someone else first instead of yourself. That evening, I started with something small. I drove to Walmart and bought a notebook, not the fancy leather-bound planner I'd use for business, but a simple spiral notebook like kids use for school. In it, I started writing letters to my family that I'd never send. The first letter was to Danny. "Dear Danny, I'm sorry I wasn't the grandfather you deserved. I'm sorry I missed your soccer games and birthday parties and all the little moments that make up a childhood. I'm sorry I made you think you had to be better to earn my love. You were always perfect exactly as you were. I was the one who needed to be better." The second letter was to Michael. Dear son, I'm sorry I taught you that achievement mattered more than presence. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to earn my pride instead of simply having it because you're my boy. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you needed me to be. You deserved better. You deserved a dad who showed up. The third letter was to Linda. Dear Linda, I'm sorry I took your love for granted. I'm sorry I thought providing for you was the same as cherishing you. I'm sorry I missed so many dinners, so many conversations, so many chances to simply be present with the most beautiful woman who ever agreed to build a life with me. You deserved a husband, not a roommate who happened to share your bank account. Writing those letters broke something open in my chest that had been locked tight for decades. I cried like I hadn't cried since my mother's funeral 20 years ago. I grieved for the father I'd never been, the husband I'd failed to become, the grandfather who was essentially a stranger to his own grandchild. But somewhere in that grief, I found something else. I found determination. I found the resolve to become the man I should have been all along, even if it was too late for the people who mattered most, even if my family never took me back. I owed it to them to become someone worthy of their forgiveness. I owed it to myself to finally figure out what actually mattered in life. And maybe, just maybe, if I could prove that I'd really changed, if I could show them a version of Theodore Harrison they'd never seen before, maybe there was still hope for redemption. The question was, how do you prove you've changed when the people you've hurt won't let you close enough to show them? By week 5 at the Riverside Motel, I'd established a routine that would have horrified the old Ted Harrison, but felt oddly comforting to the man I was becoming. I woke up at 6, not because of alarm clocks or business obligations, but because my body had finally learned to rest properly. I made instant coffee and wrote in my notebook, continuing those letters to my family that grew longer and more honest each day. Then I'd go for walks. At first, the walks were just a way to get out of that depressing motel room, but gradually they became something more. I started noticing things I'd driven past for 30 years without seeing. The way Mrs. Peterson tended her roses every morning, talking to them like old friends. The fact that the Henderson kid, Jimmy, I think his name was, practiced basketball shots in his driveway every day after school. Sometimes until it was too dark to see the hoop. These were the rhythms of ordinary life that I'd been too busy to notice when I was racing between client meetings and networking events. The small daily acts of love and dedication that actually made life worth living. It was during one of these walks that I met Eddie. Eddie Martinez was 72 years old, a Vietnam veteran who spent his mornings sitting on a bench outside Murphy's Market, feeding pigeons and watching the world go by. He had the weathered face of a man who'd seen hard times and the peaceful eyes of someone who'd made peace with them. "You're new around here," he said the third time I walked past his bench. "Not new exactly, just finally paying attention." He laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "I know that feeling. Took me about 50 years to start seeing what was right in front of me." I sat down beside him, uninvited, but somehow welcome. "What changed?" "My wife died," he said simply. 43 years of marriage, and I spent most of it thinking about the next thing I had to do, instead of appreciating what I had right in front of me. After the funeral, I came home to an empty house and realized I barely knew the woman I'd lived with for 4 decades. He threw a handful of breadcrumbs to the pigeons gathered at our feet. That's when I started sitting on this bench. Figured if I was going to waste time, I might as well waste it watching life happen instead of missing it. Do you regret it? The time you wasted? Every day. But you know what I regret more? The time I'm wasting right now feeling sorry for myself instead of doing something about it. Eddie became my first real friend in 40 years. Not a business associate, not a networking contact, not someone who could advance my career. Just a lonely old man who understood what it felt like to realize you'd been sleepwalking through your own life. We met on that bench every morning for 3 weeks, talking about everything except what we used to do for a living. Eddie told me about his daughter in Seattle, who called every Sunday but hadn't visited in 2 years. I told him about Danny's soccer games that I'd never attended and Michael's wedding where I'd spent half the reception on business calls. "The thing about regret," Eddie said one morning, "is that it's only useful if it teaches you something. Otherwise, it's just self-pity with a fancy name." "What did it teach you?" "That love isn't a feeling, it's a practice. It's showing up every day and paying attention to what matters. It's choosing to be present instead of checking out. But what if you've already lost everything? What if the people you love have given up on you?" Eddie was quiet for a long time. "Watching a mother pigeon teach her babies how to find food. Then you practice loving them from a distance. You become the person they deserved all along, even if they never see it. You do it because it's right, not because it gets you something back." That afternoon, I made a decision that probably looked crazy from the outside, but felt like the first sane thing I'd done in years. I bought a folding chair and a pair of binoculars, and I drove to Riverside Elementary School, where Danny was in 7th grade. I didn't go inside. I didn't try to talk to him or make contact. I just sat in my car in the parking lot during lunch recess and watched my grandson play with his friends. I watched him laugh at something another kid said. I watched him help a smaller boy tie his shoe. I watched him kick a soccer ball with the natural athleticism that reminded me of Michael at that age. For 45 minutes, I gave Danny my complete, undivided attention. No phone calls, no distractions, no thinking about anything except this 12-year-old boy who carried my blood and my hopes for redemption. When the bell rang and the kids went back inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The simple satisfaction of being completely present for someone I loved, even if they didn't know I was there. I did this every day for 2 weeks. Lunch recess attendance became my job, my calling, my way of practicing love from a distance. I learned Danny's friends' names by listening to them call to each other across the playground. I learned he was left-footed when he kicked the ball. I learned he had a kind heart because he always included the kids who were sitting alone. On the 10th day, Danny's ball rolled toward the fence where I was parked. As he ran to get it, he looked up and saw me through the car window. Our eyes met for just a moment, long enough for recognition to dawn on his face, long enough for me to wave slightly, long enough for him to wave back with the automatic politeness of a well-raised child. Then he grabbed his ball and ran back to his friends. But he looked over his shoulder twice, and the second time he smiled. That night, I got a phone call that changed everything. "Dad?" Michael's voice was hesitant, confused. "Danny said he saw you at his school today." My heart hammered in my chest, hammered in my... I wanted to see him. I wasn't bothering anyone. I didn't try to talk to him. "Dad, what are you doing? What is this about?" "I'm practicing." "Practicing what?" "Being a grandfather, being present, paying attention to someone I love instead of just thinking about myself." There was a long silence. "You quit your job?" "Yes. Bob Hartwell called me. He said you just walked away from everything, your accounts, your commissions, your retirement plan. It wasn't everything, Michael. It was just work. Just work. Dad, that job was your life. You lived and breathed insurance sales for 40 years. That was the problem." Another long silence. Then, "Are you having some kind of breakdown?" "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally having a breakthrough. Michael, I know you don't want to talk to me. I know you don't trust me. But I need you to know that I'm not the same man who disappointed you for 35 years. I'm trying to become someone different. Dad, you've made promises before. I'm not making promises. I'm showing proof. Every day for the past 5 weeks, I've been sitting outside Danny's school during lunch recess. Not bothering him, not trying to insert myself into his life, just watching him, just being present for him in the only way you'll allow. Why? Because I love him. Because I love you. Because I spent 35 years being too busy to pay attention to what mattered most, and I don't want to waste whatever time I have left." When Michael spoke again, his voice was softer, more confused than angry. "Dad, where are you living?" "The Riverside Motel." "Jesus. Dad, that's not a place for someone like you." Someone like me belongs exactly there, son. Someone like me needs to learn what it feels like to lose everything before he can appreciate what he had. The conversation ended without resolution, but something had shifted. For the first time in months, Michael had called me Dad, without anger in his voice. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was the first crack in the wall I'd built between us, over 37 years of choosing everything else over my family. And for now, that was enough to keep trying. The call came at 6:30 in the morning on a Thursday, jolting me from the deepest sleep I'd had in weeks. The number on my phone was one I didn't recognize, but something about the early hour made me answer it anyway. "Mr. Harrison?" The voice was young, female, professional, but strained. "This is Jennifer Caldwell from Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about Linda Harrison. You're listed as her emergency contact." The world tilted sideways. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She was brought in about an hour ago. Heart attack. She's stable now, but Mr. Harrison, it was touch and go for a while. Can you come in?" "I'm on my way." I threw on clothes and drove to the hospital faster than I'd driven anywhere in years, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Linda. My Linda, who I'd loved for 37 years and taken for granted for most of them. The woman I'd chosen to build a life with, and then proceeded to ignore while I built a career instead. The cardiac unit at Mercy General smelled like disinfectant and fear. I found the waiting area and saw Michael slumped in a plastic chair, still wearing yesterday's clothes, looking like he'd aged 5 years in one night. "Michael." He looked up, and for a moment I saw past all the anger and disappointment to the little boy who used to run to me when he was scared. "Dad, I didn't know if you'd come." "Of course I came. She's my wife." "Not lately, she isn't." The words stung because they were true. "How is she?" "Alive. The doctor said if Mrs. Chen hadn't found her collapsed in the garden and called 911 immediately." He didn't finish the sentence. I sat down beside him, maintaining the careful distance that had become our default over the years. "What happened?" "They don't know yet. She's been having chest pains for weeks, but didn't tell anyone. Typical mom, not wanting to worry us." His voice cracked. "She's been carrying everything alone since you left. The house, the bills, the worry about what people would think, all of it." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Even after I'd been thrown out, even after she'd told me she couldn't live with me anymore, Linda had been protecting me. Not telling anyone the full truth about why I was gone, handling everything herself, rather than admit that her husband had failed so completely as a human being that his own family couldn't stand him. "Can I see her?" "She's unconscious. Has been since they brought her in." Michael rubbed his eyes. "Dad, the doctor asked about stress factors, things that might have contributed to this." I didn't know what to tell him. "Tell him the truth. Tell him her husband was a selfish bastard who spent 37 years putting work before family and then got kicked out of his own house because his family couldn't take it anymore." Michael looked at me with surprise. "I've never heard you admit that before. I've never understood it before." "Not really." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the hospital sounds around us. Machines beeping, nurses talking quietly, families dealing with crisis in the way families do when everything normal gets stripped away. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why now? Why are you suddenly different? Why couldn't you have been this person when it mattered?" The question I've been asking myself every night for 6 weeks. "I don't know, son. I wish I had a better answer. Maybe I had to lose everything before I could see what I'd been doing wrong. Maybe I was too proud, too convinced I was doing the right thing, too scared to admit I didn't know how to be a husband and father. But you knew you were missing things. You knew we wanted you to be there." "I knew, but I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once I reached the next level of success, once I had enough money saved, once I'd built enough security, then I'd slow down and focus on family." The problem was that enough kept moving. There was always one more account, one more commission, one more opportunity to advance. Michael was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember my high school graduation?" I closed my eyes. "You gave the valedictorian speech. And where were you?" "Chicago, the Morrison Group presentation." Do you remember what you said when I called to tell you I'd been accepted to Northwestern? I was on another call, a conference call with corporate. You said, "That's great, son. Can we talk about this later?" This call is really important. Each memory was like a knife twist. Michael, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. I used to think you didn't love me, he said quietly. I thought maybe there was something wrong with me, something that made me not worth your time. There was never anything wrong with you. There was everything wrong with me. I know that now, but for 20 years I carried that around, the feeling that I wasn't good enough for my own father's attention. A doctor in scrubs approached us. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Dr. Williams. Are you Linda's husband?" "Yes, how is she?" "Stable, but we're going to need to keep her for several days. The heart attack was significant, and we're still running tests to determine the extent of the damage." He paused. "I understand she's been under considerable stress lately." Michael and I looked at each other. "Yes," I said, "she has been." Well, stress is a major factor in cardiac events, especially for women her age. Going forward, it's going to be crucial that she have a calm, supportive environment for her recovery. "Doctor," Michael said, "my parents are separated right now. My father doesn't live at home anymore." Dr. Williams looked between us. "I see. Well, that complicates things. Mrs. Harrison is going to need help at home for at least several weeks. Someone to manage her medications, monitor her activity level, help with daily tasks. Do you have other family members who could assist?" "I can take time off work," Michael said immediately. "No!" The word came out of me with more force than I'd intended. "Michael, you have your own family to take care of. You have Danny, you have Sarah, you have your job. You can't put your life on hold because I screwed up mine." "Then what do you suggest, Dad? Because Mom can't live alone right now, and she certainly can't come live with us. Sarah and I don't have room. And even if we did, I'll take care of her." Both Michael and Dr. Williams stared at me. "Dad, she threw you out of the house. She changed the locks. Then I'll stay in the guest room. I'll sleep on the couch. I'll camp in the backyard if I have to. But I'm not letting your mother recover from a heart attack alone because I was too selfish to be a proper husband for 37 years. She'll never agree to it. Then I'll ask her. When she wakes up, I'll ask her to let me take care of her. Not as her husband, not with any expectation of forgiveness or reconciliation, but as the person who owes her the most and has the most time to give." Dr. Williams cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, I don't know the details of your family situation, but I do know that Mrs. Harrison's recovery is going to depend heavily on having consistent, reliable care. If Mr. Harrison is willing and able to provide that—" "I am," I said. "I'm completely available. No job, no other obligations, nothing but time and the chance to finally put someone else's needs before my own." "Dad," Michael said quietly, "what if she says no? Then I'll respect her decision. But Michael, I have to try. I have to try to be the husband she deserved all along, even if it's too late for us to be married." That afternoon, when Linda woke up groggy and confused, hooked to machines that monitored her heartbeat and oxygen levels, I was sitting beside her bed. Her eyes found mine, and for a moment I saw the young woman I'd fallen in love with 39 years ago. "Ted?" Her voice was weak, confused. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to ask you a question, Linda, and I want you to think about it before you answer." She nodded slightly. "Will you let me take care of you while you recover? Will you let me be the husband I should have been all along, even if it's just for a few weeks?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Ted, I can't go through this again. I can't let myself hope that you've changed just to have you go back to the way you were. I'm not asking you to hope for anything. I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back or pretend the past 37 years didn't happen. I'm just asking you to let me take care of you because you need care and I need to give it. And after I'm better, after you're better, I'll go back to wherever you want me to go. But Linda, please, let me do this one thing right. Let me prove that I can put your needs first, even if it's the last thing I ever do for you." She was quiet for a long time, studying my face like she was looking for something she'd lost years ago. "Okay," she whispered finally. "Okay." And just like that, I was going home. Not as a husband, not as a partner, but as a caregiver with one last chance to show the woman I loved what she'd always meant to me. One last chance to put someone else first. Going home felt like visiting a museum of my own failures. Every room held memories of moments I'd missed, conversations I'd cut short, family time I'd sacrificed for one more phone call. Linda's presence made it both better and worse. Better because she was alive and recovering, worse because I could see how much she'd changed in the 7 weeks since I'd been gone. She was thinner, more fragile, with new lines around her eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. The woman who'd once filled our house with laughter and music now moved carefully, as if she wasn't sure she belonged in her own space anymore. It broke my heart to realize that my absence had diminished her rather than freed her. "The guest room is made up," she said when we got home from the hospital. "I put fresh sheets on the bed this morning, fresh sheets in the guest room of my own house. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us." "Linda, thank you for letting me do this." "Don't thank me yet, Ted. We don't know how this is going to go." She was right to be cautious. The first few days were awkward, tense, filled with the careful politeness of strangers sharing space. I made her breakfast and brought her medications on schedule. She said thank you and please like I was hired help rather than the man she'd shared a bed with for 37 years. But slowly, gradually, something began to shift. It started with small things. I noticed that Linda had always liked her coffee slightly cooler than most people, so I'd let it sit for exactly 3 minutes before bringing it to her. She noticed that I remembered to put honey in her tea instead of sugar, something I'd apparently learned years ago but never consciously acknowledged. "You don't have to hover," she said on the 4th day when she caught me watching her navigate the stairs. "I know, I want to be sure you're okay." "I'm okay, Ted. Dr. Williams said I could resume normal activities as long as I don't overdo it." "What's normal for you now?" The question seemed to surprise her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do you do with your days? What makes you happy? What matters to you?" I paused. I realized I haven't asked you those questions in about 20 years. Linda sat down heavily on the couch, like the weight of the conversation was more than she could handle, standing up. "I read," she said finally. "I garden. I volunteer at the hospital gift shop twice a week. I have lunch with Margaret Chen on Fridays. I talk to my sister in Denver every Sunday." She looked at me with something like defiance. "I built a life that didn't depend on you being in it." "That's good," I said, and meant it. "That's really good, Linda. I'm glad you found things that made you happy." "Are you?" "Because for 30 years, whenever I tried to talk to you about the things that interested me, your eyes would glaze over and you'd start thinking about work." She was right. I'd always thought of Linda's interests as hobbies, pleasant distractions that filled her time while I did the important work of providing for our family. I'd never understood that her book club and garden and friendships weren't just ways to pass time. They were the things that gave her life meaning. "Tell me about your books," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "What are you reading now?" She studied my face suspiciously. "You don't really want to know." "I do. I really do." So she told me. About the historical fiction novel she was reading about women in World War II, about how the author's research had changed her understanding of that period, about how the book club had gotten into a heated discussion about moral choices in impossible circumstances. I listened. Really listened, without checking my phone or thinking about anything else. I asked questions, not to be polite, but because I was genuinely interested in her thoughts, her opinions, her insights into things I'd never taken the time to understand. "You're different," Linda said when she finished telling me about the book. "How?" "You're here, present. When you ask me a question, you actually want to hear the answer." "I always wanted to hear your answers, Linda. I just never made time to listen to them." On the 6th day, Michael brought Danny by to see his grandmother. I was in the kitchen when they arrived, and I heard Danny's excited voice in the living room. "Grandma Linda, Mom made you cookies, but I'm not supposed to eat them because they're for sick people, but Mom said maybe just one wouldn't hurt if you said it was okay." Linda's laugh. The first real laugh I'd heard from her since the heart attack filled the house with warmth I'd forgotten existed. I stayed in the kitchen, giving them privacy, but I could hear their conversation through the open doorway. Danny told Linda about school, about soccer practice, about a book report he was writing on dolphins. Linda asked questions and made comments and gave him her complete attention in a way that reminded me of why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. "Grandma," Danny said at one point, "is Grandpa Ted living here again?" "For now, sweetheart. He's helping take care of me while I get better." "Is he different now?" "Dad said he might be different." There was a pause. "We're still figuring that out, Danny." "Well, I hope he is, because I miss having a grandpa." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter and closed my eyes, feeling the weight of all the years I'd wasted, all the relationships I'd neglected, all the love I'd been too busy to accept or return. When Michael came into the kitchen a few minutes later, he found me standing at the sink with tears streaming down my face. "Dad, you okay?" "He misses having a grandpa," I said, without turning around. "Not misses me specifically, misses having a grandpa, because I was never really one to begin with." Michael was quiet for a moment. "No," he said finally, "you weren't." "How do I fix that? How do I become the grandfather he deserves when I don't even know how to be one? The same way you're learning to take care of Mom." "I guess, one day at a time, one choice at a time." That evening, after Michael and Danny left, Linda and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was something we used to do when we were young and broke and had nothing but time and each other's company. "Ted," Linda said quietly, "can I ask you something? Anything. What happened to us? What happened to the couple we used to be?" I thought about it for a long time, watching the light fade from the sky. I think I got so focused on building a life for us that I forgot to live it with you. I got so worried about providing for our future that I missed our present. But why? Why was success so important to you that you'd sacrifice everything else for it? "Because I was afraid," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "I was afraid that if I didn't achieve enough, accomplish enough, earn enough, you'd realize you'd married the wrong man. I was afraid that love alone wouldn't be enough to keep you." Linda turned to look at me, her eyes soft in the twilight. "Oh, Ted, love was all I ever wanted from you. Love and presence and the feeling that I mattered to you as much as your clients did. You mattered more. You always mattered more. I just didn't know how to show you. And now I'm learning. It's probably too late, probably. But I'm learning." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets and watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow's agenda or next week's opportunities. I was just sitting with my wife, being present in the moment, appreciating the simple gift of shared quiet. "Ted," Linda said as we prepared to go inside, "I want you to know something. These past few days, taking care of me, being here, this is the most loved I've felt in 20 years. Linda, I'm not saying I forgive you. I'm not saying we can go back to the way things were. But I want you to know that this version of you, the man you've been since you came home, this is the man I fell in love with 39 years ago. This is the man I always hoped you'd become." That night, lying alone in the guest room of my own house, I realized that Linda had just given me the greatest gift possible. Hope. Not hope for reconciliation necessarily, but hope that change was actually possible, that I could become someone worth loving again. The question was whether I could sustain this transformation long enough to prove it was real, or whether I'd eventually revert to the selfish, work-obsessed man I'd been for 4 decades. The answer would determine not just my future, but whether my family could ever trust me with their hearts again. 2 weeks into Linda's recovery, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I was looking for her insurance card in her desk drawer when I found them, a stack of letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me but never sent. The dates went back years. Some were typed, some handwritten, all of them filled with words Linda had wanted to say but never found the courage to speak aloud. Words about loneliness, about feeling invisible in her own marriage, about watching me choose work over family again and again until she stopped expecting anything different. December 15th, 2018. Ted missed Danny's Christmas pageant tonight. He promised he'd be there, even bought a new camera to film it. But the Peterson account had an emergency, and once again, his family came second to his career. I sat alone in the auditorium, surrounded by couples and families, and realized I couldn't remember the last time my husband chose me over work. I'm starting to wonder if he ever will. March 22nd, 2019. Ted's working late again, the third night this week. When I asked if we could have dinner together tomorrow, just the two of us, no phones, no distractions, he said he'd check his calendar. He had to check his calendar to see if he could have dinner with his wife. I'm sitting in our empty house, eating takeout Chinese food alone, and wondering when I became an appointment in my husband's schedule. August 10th, 2020. 35 years of marriage today. Ted forgot. He's in Portland at a conference, calling it a great opportunity to expand the West Coast market. I'm wearing the dress I bought hoping we'd celebrate together. Is sitting at the restaurant where we had our first date, pretending to read a book so people won't realize I'm dining alone on my anniversary. Each letter was a window into the pain I'd caused through my neglect, the slow erosion of love and respect that happens when someone consistently demonstrates that other things matter more than their marriage. But they were also something else, evidence of a woman who'd loved me enough to keep trying, keep hoping, keep writing letters to a husband who was too busy to notice her heartbreak. The most recent letter was dated just 3 days before my belongings appeared on the front lawn. October 8th, I can't do this anymore. 8th. I've spent 37 years loving a man who treats me like a roommate with benefits. Tonight, when Ted took a client call during dinner, again, and I asked him to please finish his meal with his family, he said, "Linda, this is important." As if nothing I had to say could ever be as important as business. I'm done competing with his career for his attention. I'm done feeling like an inconvenience in my own marriage. Michael is right. Sometimes loving someone means stopping the cycle that's slowly killing you both. I sat in her study, holding evidence of decades of my failures, and cried for the woman who'd suffered in silence while I built a career that ultimately meant nothing without someone to share it with. "Ted!" Linda's voice came from the doorway. "What are you doing in here?" I held up the letters, unable to speak. Her face went pale. "You weren't supposed to find those." "Linda, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say any of this?" I tried. For years I tried, but every time I brought up feeling neglected or lonely, you'd get defensive and remind me of all the things you were providing for our family. You'd make me feel guilty for wanting your time when you were working so hard to give me security. She sat down across from me, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "Those letters were my way of talking to you when I couldn't find the words in person. They were my way of trying to make sense of how I could feel so alone while living with another person." "The August 10th letter," I said quietly. "Our 35th anniversary. You spent it alone. I waited until 10 o'clock for you to call. When you finally did, you spent 5 minutes asking about my day and 40 minutes telling me about your conference. Then you had to go because you were meeting clients for drinks." I remembered that call. I remembered being slightly annoyed that Linda seemed distant, distracted. I'd chalked it up to her being tired and had told myself I'd make it up to her when I got home. But when I got home, there had been another crisis. Another opportunity, another reason to postpone the intimate conversation that might have saved our marriage. "Linda, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. The missed anniversaries, the interrupted dinners, the years of making you feel like you didn't matter. I know you are, but Ted, sorry doesn't give me back those 37 years. Sorry doesn't erase the loneliness or the feeling that I married a man who loved his career more than his wife. What can I do? How can I make this right? I don't know if you can. I don't know if there's enough time left to rebuild what we lost, or if I have enough energy to try again." That evening, I did something I should have done decades earlier. I wrote Linda a letter of my own. Dear Linda, I found your letters today, and reading them broke my heart in all the ways it should have been broken years ago. You spent decades trying to get my attention, trying to make me understand that you needed more than financial security from your husband. You needed presence, partnership, and the feeling that you mattered to me as much as my clients did. I failed you. Not just occasionally, not just during busy seasons, but consistently and completely for 37 years. I treated our marriage like a business arrangement, where as long as I met my financial obligations, everything else would take care of itself. I know now that I was wrong. I know that love requires more than just providing and protecting. It requires showing up, paying attention, and choosing the people you love over everything else that seems important in the moment. I can't give you back the years I wasted on things that didn't matter. I can't undo the anniversaries I missed, the dinners I interrupted, or the countless times I made you feel invisible in your own marriage. But I can give you something I've never given you before. My complete, undivided attention. Not as penance, not because I'm trying to win you back, but because you deserve to experience what it feels like to be truly cherished by someone who finally understands your worth. Whether you decide to give our marriage another chance or not, I want to spend whatever time we have left showing you the love and respect you deserved all along. With all my love and deepest regrets, Ted. I left the letter on her nightstand and went to bed in the guest room, not knowing what to expect, but hoping she'd understand that this wasn't manipulation or strategy. It was simply the truth from a man who'd finally learned the difference between loving someone and knowing how to love them. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen making coffee, my letter in her hand. "Ted," she said without turning around, "do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day?" I said a lot of things. You said that marrying me was the smartest business decision you'd ever make because I'd be the perfect wife for a successful man. I closed my eyes, remembering. At the time, I'd thought it was a compliment. I'd thought I was telling her how valuable she was to my future success. Even then, Linda continued, even on our wedding day, you were thinking about me in terms of how I could advance your career rather than how much joy I brought to your life. Linda, I was young and stupid and you never changed. For 37 years, you saw me as a supporting character in your story rather than the co-star of our life together. She turned to face me and I saw tears in her eyes. These past 3 weeks, taking care of me, being present, asking about my books and my thoughts and my dreams. This is the first time in our entire marriage that I felt like you actually see me. Not as your wife, not as Danny's grandmother, not as the woman who manages your household, but as Linda, as a person with her own hopes and interests and value. You are valuable. You're the most valuable. Don't, she said gently, don't make promises about how different things will be going forward. Don't tell me this is the new you and everything will be better now. I've heard those promises before. Then what do you want from me? I want you to keep being the man you've been for these 3 weeks, not because you're trying to win me back, not because you want something from me, but because it's who you really are underneath all that ambition and fear. And if I can do that, if I can prove that this isn't temporary. Linda was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the garden she'd tended alone for so many years. Then maybe, she said finally, we can figure out how to build something new. Not the marriage we had, but something better, something based on who we are now rather than who we were when we were too young to know better. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, but it was hope. Real, tangible hope that two people who'd lost their way could find a path forward together. For the first time since I'd found my belongings on the front lawn, I believed that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become the husband Linda had always deserved. The test came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other day in our carefully rebuilt routine. Linda was strong enough now to resume most of her normal activities, and I'd settled into the rhythm of caring for her without the awkwardness that had marked our first days together. I was making breakfast when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Bob Hartwell's name, and I almost didn't answer it. But something, maybe old habits, maybe curiosity, made me pick up. Ted, thank God you answered. I need you. Bob, I told you I'm not coming back. I'm retired. This isn't about coming back permanently. This is about saving everything you built over 40 years. The Morrison Group is pulling their account, $2.3 million in annual premiums, Ted. They're citing lack of continuity in service since you left. My stomach clenched. The Morrison Group had been my biggest client, a relationship I'd cultivated for over a decade. They represented nearly 30% of my total book of business. Rodriguez can handle them. Miller knows the account. They don't want Rodriguez or Miller. They want you. They said if you're not back by Friday to personally handle their renewal, they're taking their business to Mutual Assurance. I glanced toward the living room where Linda was reading her book, trusting me to take care of things while she recovered from a heart attack that stress had helped cause. Bob, I can't. I'm taking care of my wife. Ted, listen to me. This isn't just about the Morrison Group. If they leave, it's going to start a domino effect. Other clients are going to question whether Hartwell Insurance is stable without you. We could lose everything. That's not my problem anymore. It is your problem. You have equity in this company. You have retirement money tied up in these accounts. If the business fails, you lose everything you've worked for. Everything I've worked for. The phrase that had motivated me for 40 years suddenly sounded like a foreign language. Bob, I appreciate the position you're in, but my answer is no. Find another way to save the Morrison account. There is no other way. Ted, this is your legacy we're talking about. 40 years of building relationships, of establishing trust, of creating something that matters. Are you really going to throw all that away? Linda appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the intensity in my voice. She looked concerned, not just about my conversation, but about what my response would reveal about whether I'd really changed. Let me call you back, I told Bob, and hung up. Everything okay? Linda asked. I told her about the call, about the Morrison Group's ultimatum, about the potential collapse of everything I'd built at Hartwell Insurance. As I spoke, I watched her face carefully, looking for signs of what she was thinking. What are you going to do? She asked when I finished. I'm going to stay here and take care of you. Ted, this is your life's work. This is everything you built. No, Linda, you're my life's work. Our marriage, our family, the relationships I neglected for 40 years. That's what I should have been building all along. She studied my face, and I could see her trying to determine if this was real or performance. What if I told you to go? What if I said I'm feeling well enough to take care of myself for a few days? I'd say thank you for the offer, but I'm not leaving you alone 3 weeks after a heart attack. And if I insisted, I'd still say no, even if it means losing millions of dollars in business. Linda, I spent 40 years choosing money over family. I'm not making that mistake again. My phone rang again, Bob's name on the screen. Answer it, Linda said. I don't need to answer it. I know what he's going to say, and my answer isn't going to change. Answer it anyway. I want to hear you say no. I picked up the phone. Bob, my answer is still, Ted, I just got off the phone with Charles Morrison himself. He's willing to fly here personally to meet with you. He said if you can give him 2 hours on Thursday, just 2 hours to review the account and assure him of continuity, he'll renew for another 3 years. 2 hours. Not even a full day. Just enough time to save millions of dollars in business and preserve 40 years of relationship building. Where would the meeting be? Our office. Thursday at 2 o'clock. Ted, this is the easiest money you'll ever make. 2 hours of your time and you save everything. I looked at Linda, who was watching me with the expression of someone whose entire future was hanging in the balance of my next words. Bob, I appreciate Charles Morrison's willingness to meet, but I'm not available Thursday at 2 o'clock. I'm not available any time this week or next week or any week for the foreseeable future. Ted, you're making a mistake. You're throwing away everything you've worked for. No, Bob, I'm finally holding on to everything that matters. I hung up and turned off my phone. Linda was staring at me with tears in her eyes. "Ted, do you understand what you just did? I chose you. I chose us. I chose being present for the woman I love over making money from people who don't really know me. But your retirement, your financial security. Linda, I have enough money saved to last us the rest of our lives if we're careful. I don't need more wealth. I need more time with you. I need more opportunities to show you that you matter more to me than any business deal ever could." She sat down heavily in a kitchen chair, overwhelmed by what had just happened. 40 years, she whispered. "For 40 years, I competed with your career for your attention. And I lost every single time. And now you just chose me over $2.3 million. It wasn't even a difficult choice, Linda. The difficult choice was realizing how many times I chose wrong in the past. That afternoon, we took a walk through the neighborhood we'd lived in for 28 years, but that I'd never really explored. Linda pointed out changes I'd missed. New families, renovated houses, gardens that had evolved over the seasons while I was too busy to notice. "Mrs. Peterson planted those roses 3 years ago," she said as we passed our neighbor's yard. She asked me for advice about soil preparation. We spent an entire afternoon working in her garden together. "I never knew you were interested in gardening." "I've been gardening for 15 years. Ted, you just never paid attention." We walked past the park where Danny played soccer, where Michael had learned to ride a bike, where I'd promised to take my family for picnics that never happened, because work always intervened. "Do you ever wonder what our life would have been like if you'd been present for it?" Linda asked. "Every day, especially now. What do you think would have been different?" I thought about it as we walked. "I think I would have known you better, really known you, your thoughts, your dreams, your fears, your joys. I think Michael would have felt more confident growing up, more secure in his father's love. I think Danny would have had a grandfather who showed up for his soccer games and actually knew his friends' names. And you? What would have been different for you?" "I think I would have been happier. I think I would have understood earlier that success without people to share it with is just expensive loneliness." When we got home, there were 3 voicemail messages from Bob Hartwell, each one more desperate than the last. Charles Morrison had called personally, offering to increase the commission if I'd reconsider. Other clients had heard about the Morrison situation and were questioning whether they should stay with Hartwell Insurance. I deleted all the messages without calling back. "Any regrets?" Linda asked. "Only that it took me 65 years to figure out what actually matters in life." That evening, as we sat on the back porch watching another sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Linda took my hand for the first time since I'd moved back into the house. "Ted," she said quietly, "I think I'm ready to try again." "Try what again?" "Being married. Not the marriage we had, but a new one. One where we're both present, both committed to putting each other first." I squeezed her hand, feeling 40 years of mistakes and regrets dissolving into hope for a future I'd almost thrown away. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that you're not the same man who left this house 2 months ago. I'm sure that you've finally learned the difference between providing for a family and being part of one. And if I mess up again, if I fall back into old patterns, then we'll deal with it together. But Ted, I don't think you will. I think you've finally figured out what I've been trying to tell you for 37 years. What's that? That love isn't something you earn through achievement. It's something you nurture through presence." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I realized that I'd just passed the most important test of my life. When forced to choose between financial success and being present for the woman I loved, I'd finally made the right choice. And in making that choice, I'd discovered something more valuable than any commission check: the peace that comes from knowing your priorities are finally in the right order. The real revelation came on a Saturday morning in November, but it wasn't what I expected. I thought the hardest part of changing my life would be giving up work, learning to be present, proving to my family that I was different. I was wrong. The hardest part was discovering that my failures had echoes I'd never imagined. Michael arrived at the house around 10, without Danny, looking like a man carrying the weight of the world. Linda was in the garden, and I was cleaning out the garage, a project I'd been putting off for 20 years but finally had time to tackle. "Dad, we need to talk." Something in his voice made me put down the box I was sorting and give him my full attention. "What's wrong?" "Sarah's leaving me." The words hit like a physical blow. "What? Michael, what happened?" "She said she can't watch me turn into you. She said she's tired of competing with my career for my attention, tired of making excuses to Danny about why Daddy works late every night, tired of feeling like a single mother married to a stranger." I sat down heavily on an overturned crate, feeling the terrible symmetry of the moment. When did this start? It's been building for months, maybe years. I've been working 60, 70-hour weeks, telling myself it was for our future, for Danny's college fund, for financial security. But the truth is, he paused, running his hands through his hair. The truth is, I loved it. I loved the success, the recognition, the feeling of being indispensable at work. Michael, I became you, Dad. Despite everything I swore I'd never do, despite watching what your absence did to our family, I became exactly what I hated about you. The confession hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. My son, who'd spent 35 years angry at me for choosing work over family, had fallen into the same trap. "Last Tuesday," Michael continued, "Danny had a school play. He was playing Abraham Lincoln in the third-grade production of American Heroes. He'd been practicing his lines for weeks, excited about wearing the fake beard, talking about how I was going to videotape everything. Did you go?" "I tried to. I was walking out of the office when Marcus Caldwell called with an emergency audit situation. 3 hours of work," he said. "Just 3 hours to save a major client." I already knew how this story ended, but I let him tell it. I called Sarah and told her I'd be late, that she should go ahead and I'd meet them there. But 3 hours turned into 5 hours, and by the time I got to the school, the play was over. Danny was sitting in the parking lot in his Lincoln costume, still wearing that fake beard, waiting for his dad. Michael's voice cracked. He looked at me and said, "It's okay, Daddy. Mom took videos. You can watch them when you're not busy." Oh, son. He didn't cry, he didn't throw a tantrum, he just accepted it, like he was already learning that work comes first in our family, like he was learning that promises from Daddy don't really mean anything. I thought about 8-year-old Michael in his baseball uniform, telling me it was okay that I'd missed his game, the resignation in his voice, the way he'd stopped asking me to come to things because he'd learned that disappointment was inevitable. That night, Sarah and I had the worst fight of our marriage. She said she felt like she was raising Danny alone, like she was married to a ghost who happened to pay the bills. She said she watched me promise Danny I'd be there for things and then break those promises for work, just like you used to do. What did you say? I said she was being unfair. I said I was providing for our family, building our future, working hard so Danny could have opportunities. I said all the same things you used to say. The parallel was devastating. And what did she say? She said, "You sound exactly like your father." And look how that turned out. Michael stood up and walked to the garage window, looking out at the house where he'd grown up, feeling like he wasn't important enough to hold his father's attention. "Dad, do you know what the worst part is? I thought I was different. I thought because I came to some of Danny's games, because I helped with homework sometimes, because I wasn't as extreme as you were, that I was being a good father." "You are a good father." "No, I'm not. I'm a father who shows up when it's convenient, who puts my son second to my career, who makes promises I don't keep. I'm exactly what I swore I'd never become." "Michael, it's not too late. You can change this." That's what I told Sarah, but she said she'd heard enough promises about change. She said if I wanted to save our marriage, I needed to show her something different, not just tell her something different. "So what are you going to do?" He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. The look of a man who'd finally understood what was really at stake. "I'm quitting my job." "What?" "I already talked to Henderson yesterday. I'm giving 2 weeks' notice. I'm starting my own accounting practice, working from home, setting my own hours. I'll make less money, but I'll be there when Danny gets home from school. I'll be able to go to his plays and games and parent-teacher conferences. Michael, that's a huge financial risk. So is losing my family. Dad, I've been watching you these past 2 months, watching how you take care of Mom, how you choose her over everything else, and I realize something. All the money in the world doesn't mean anything if you don't have people to share it with. I felt a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Pride that my son had recognized the problem before it was too late to fix it. Heartbreak that he'd had to learn this lesson at all. What does Sarah say about you quitting? She said she'll believe it when she sees it. She's taking Danny to her mother's house for a few weeks while I figure out my priorities. She said, if I can prove that I've really changed, if I can show her that family comes first now, she'll consider coming home. And if you can't prove it, then I'll be a divorced father with weekend visitation, wondering how I destroyed the most important relationships in my life for a career that nobody will remember 10 years after I'm gone. That afternoon, Michael and I talked for hours about the seductive power of professional success, about how easy it is to convince yourself that working more hours means loving your family more, about the way ambition can slowly poison everything that actually matters. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you regret it? All those years of choosing work over family? Every day? But Michael, if there's one thing I've learned these past few months, it's that regret is only useful if it motivates change. You can't undo the past, but you can choose to be different going forward. What if it's too late? What if I've already damaged Danny the way you damaged me? Then you do what I'm doing. You spend every day proving that you're not that person anymore. You show up consistently, reliably, completely. You make your family feel like they're the most important thing in your world. And eventually they believe you? Eventually you become the man you're pretending to be. And maybe, if you're lucky, they notice. That evening, Linda and I sat on the back porch as we'd done every night since I'd moved back home. I told her about my conversation with Michael, about how the cycle of choosing career over family had continued into the next generation despite his best intentions. He's going to be okay, Linda said. He's recognized the problem while there's still time to fix it. What about us? Are we going to be okay? Linda took my hand, something that still felt miraculous after 2 months of rebuilding trust between us. Ted, I've been thinking about something you said a few weeks ago, about how you chose me over the Morrison Group account. What about it? At the time, I thought it was romantic, proof that you'd finally learned to put family first. But I realized something today. What? You shouldn't have had to choose. In a healthy marriage, there would never be a question about whether your wife's recovery from a heart attack was more important than a business meeting. She was right. The fact that choosing family over work had felt like such a monumental decision only highlighted how twisted my priorities had been for decades. The old Ted would have found a way to justify going to that meeting, she continued. He would have told himself that I was fine, that I didn't really need him, that providing for our future was more important than being present for our present. But I didn't do that. No, you didn't. And that's how I know you've really changed. Not because you made the right choice, but because the choice was so obvious to you that you didn't even have to think about it. As we watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I thought about Michael starting over at 35, choosing love over ambition before it was too late. I thought about Danny, who might grow up with a father who showed up consistently, who put family first, who understood that presence was more valuable than any promotion. Linda, I said quietly, do you think we broke the cycle? I think you broke it for yourself. Michael's breaking it for his family, and maybe Danny will grow up understanding that love isn't something you have to earn through achievement. And us? What about our marriage? Linda squeezed my hand. I think we're building something new, not trying to fix what was broken, but creating something better from the pieces that are left. That night, lying in the guest room that had become my temporary home while we figured out how to be married to each other again, I realized that redemption wasn't just about changing yourself. It was about inspiring change in the people you loved, about breaking cycles that had been repeating for generations, about proving that it's never too late to choose love over everything else that seems important. My son was risking his career to save his marriage. My grandson might grow up with a father who understood what mattered most. And my wife was learning to trust me again after 37 years of disappointment. The question was whether I could sustain this transformation long enough to prove that this version of Theodore Harrison was the real one, not just a temporary response to crisis. The answer would determine whether my family's healing would last, or whether we'd all slide back into the patterns that had nearly destroyed us in the first place. 3 days before Christmas, Linda asked me to move back into our bedroom. Not because everything's fixed, she said as we stood in the doorway looking at the bed we'd shared for 37 years, but because I want to try sleeping next to my husband again instead of the stranger who used to live here. I'd been in the guest room for 4 months, first banished there by my own failures, then choosing to stay there while we rebuilt trust. Moving back felt like crossing a bridge I wasn't sure would hold my weight. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I'm sure that I want to find out if we can be intimate again, not just physically, but emotionally. I want to see if we can share space without you checking your phone every 5 minutes or thinking about work problems while I'm trying to talk to you. I don't have work problems anymore. I know. That's why I think this might work." That first night back in our bed was awkward. We lay stiffly on our respective sides, hyper-aware of each other's breathing, both of us trying to remember how to be married people instead of polite roommates. But sometime in the middle of the night, Linda's hand found mine across the sheets, and I woke up Christmas morning with my wife's head on my shoulder for the first time in over a year. Michael and Sarah had been separated for 6 weeks. He'd kept his promise about quitting his job and starting his own practice, working from their home office so he could be there when Danny got home from school. But Sarah was still at her mother's house, still deciding whether she believed his transformation was real. "She says she needs to see a pattern," Michael told me as we set up the Christmas tree in our living room. "Not just weeks of good behavior, but months, maybe longer." "That's fair," I said, remembering how long it had taken Linda to trust that my changes weren't temporary. "What does Danny think about all this?" "He's confused. He knows Mom and Dad are having problems, but he doesn't understand why. He keeps asking when Mom's coming home, when we're going to be a family again." "What do you tell him?" "I tell him that sometimes adults need time to figure out how to be better people. The dad made some mistakes and needs to prove he's learned from them." It was the same conversation I'd had with him 40 years earlier, when his grandfather had missed another family dinner for overtime at the factory. The cycle of fathers disappointing their children, of work taking precedence over presence, of love being something you had to earn rather than something freely given. But this time felt different. This time, Michael was actively fighting against the pattern instead of unconsciously repeating it. Christmas Eve dinner was just the 4 of us: Linda, Michael, Danny, and me. Sarah had agreed to let Danny spend Christmas with his father, but she wasn't ready to join family gatherings yet. The absence felt like a missing piece in a puzzle we were trying to complete. "Grandpa Ted," Danny said as we were cleaning up after dinner, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, buddy." "Why did you stop working? Dad said you used to work all the time. But now you don't work at all." I looked at Linda and Michael, wondering how much truth a 12-year-old could handle. "Well, Danny, I realized I was spending so much time working that I was missing all the important stuff with my family. I was missing dinners like this one, and conversations like this one, and just the chance to know the people I love. But don't you need money? I need some money, sure, but I need time with you and Grandma Linda and your dad more than I need lots of money." Danny considered this seriously. "Is that why Dad doesn't work as much anymore? Because he wants time with me? What do you think?" "I think maybe. He picks me up from school now every day, and he helps with my homework, and he comes to my soccer practices." Danny paused. "But Mom's still mad at him." Sometimes when people hurt each other, it takes time to heal. Your mom loves your dad, but she needs to see that he's really changed before she can trust him again. How long does that take? I don't know, buddy, but I know it's worth waiting for. That night, Linda and I lay in our bed talking about the day, about Michael's struggle to win back his family, about the strange miracle of second chances. "Do you think Sarah will come back?" Linda asked. "I think she wants to, but I also think she's smart to be careful. Michael hurt her badly, and it's going to take time to rebuild that trust. Like us." "Like us." Linda rolled over to face me in the darkness. "Ted, can I tell you something I've never told you before? Anything. For the first 10 years of our marriage, I used to lie awake at night planning what I'd say if you ever came home early and wanted to just talk. I'd rehearse conversations about my day, about things I was thinking, about dreams I had, but you never came home early. And when you did come home, you were always too tired or too distracted to really talk. Linda, I'm so sorry. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because now, lying here talking to you about real things, about our family and our hopes and our fears, this is what I always wanted our marriage to be. Better late than never. Better late than never." New Year's Eve was quiet. We stayed home, just the two of us, watching old movies and talking about the year that had changed everything. At midnight, Linda kissed me, really kissed me, not the polite peck on the cheek that had marked most of our interactions for the past decade. "Happy New Year, Ted. Happy New Year, Linda. Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on us. For letting me come home. For giving me a chance to prove I could be the husband you deserved. Thank you for becoming him." January brought news that changed everything. Sarah called Michael on a Tuesday morning and asked if they could meet for coffee. Not to reconcile, she said, but to talk about the possibility of family counseling. "She said she's been watching me from a distance," Michael told me after the meeting, "checking with Danny about whether I'm really showing up for school events and soccer practices, talking to her friends who work at his school about whether I seem different. And what did they tell her? That I'm there, consistently, that I ask questions about Danny's work and his friends, that I seem present instead of distracted." He paused. "She said she's willing to try counseling if I'm serious about making permanent changes. Are you?" "Dad, I'd rather lose every client I have than lose my family. I've learned that from watching you." The counseling sessions were hard work. Michael and Sarah had to dig into years of accumulated resentment, unmet expectations, and broken promises. But slowly, gradually, they began to rebuild trust. "The counselor asked me what I wanted most from Michael," Sarah told us during a Sunday dinner in February. "I said I wanted to feel like I mattered to him as much as his work did. I wanted him to be present when he was with us, not physically there, but mentally, somewhere else." "And what did Michael say?" Linda asked. "He said he wanted to be the kind of husband and father who deserved our love, instead of the kind who had to earn it through achievement." By March, Sarah and Danny had moved back home. The reunification wasn't seamless. There were still arguments, still moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves. But there was something different in the way Michael talked about his family, in the way he prioritized his time, in the way he showed up for the small moments that actually mattered. "Dad," he said one evening as we watched Danny practice soccer in the backyard, "I want to thank you for something." "What?" "For showing me what it looks like to choose family over everything else. I spent 35 years angry at you for your priorities, but I never really understood how to have different priorities until I watched you change yours. You figured it out on your own. Son, I just provided a cautionary tale. No, you provided more than that. You proved that it's never too late to become the person your family needs you to be." That night, as Linda and I prepared for bed in the room we were slowly learning to share again, I thought about the strange mathematics of redemption. How 40 years of choosing wrong could be balanced by a few months of choosing right. How decades of absence could be partially redeemed by consistent presence. How a family could be rebuilt from the ashes of its own destruction if everyone was willing to forgive and change. "Ted," Linda said as she brushed her hair at the vanity where she'd sat every night for 37 years, Do you know what the best part of this whole experience has been? What? Discovering that we actually like each other. Not just love each other out of habit or obligation, but genuinely enjoy each other's company. We do, don't we? We do. And that gives me hope that the next 30 years might be even better than the first 37. As I fell asleep next to my wife, listening to her peaceful breathing and feeling grateful for the ordinary miracle of her presence, I realized that redemption wasn't a destination you arrived at. It was a daily choice to be better than you were yesterday, to love more generously than you had before, to show up consistently for the people who mattered most. I'd spent 65 years learning how to be successful at work, but it had taken losing everything to finally learn how to be successful at love. The question now was whether I could sustain this transformation for the rest of my life, or whether complacency would creep back in and threaten everything we'd rebuilt. The answer would determine whether our family's healing was permanent or just another temporary reprieve before the next crisis. The phone call came at 7:43 on a Thursday morning in May, 8 months after I'd found my belongings scattered across the front lawn. I was making coffee while Linda showered, enjoying the simple routine we'd developed since rebuilding our marriage, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Harrison, this is Jennifer Walsh from Corporate Dynamics. I'm calling because we have an opportunity that might interest you." Corporate Dynamics was one of the biggest insurance companies in the country. I'd tried to get hired there 20 years ago and been turned down for lacking the right connections. "I'm not looking for work, Ms. Walsh. Mr. Harrison, we know about your departure from Hartwell Insurance. We also know about your reputation in the industry. We'd like to offer you a position as Regional Vice President for our Midwest division. The salary is $250,000 a year, plus commissions that could easily double that." I nearly dropped the coffee cup. $500,000 a year, more money than I'd ever dreamed of making. "Ms. Walsh, I appreciate the offer, but I'm retired. Mr. Harrison, I don't think you understand. This isn't just any position. You'd be overseeing 12 offices, managing 200 agents, handling our biggest corporate clients. This is the kind of opportunity that only comes once in a lifetime. Once in a lifetime." The phrase that had motivated me for 40 years, the promise of something bigger, better, more impressive than what I already had. What would the time commitment be? I heard myself asking. Well, there would be significant travel initially, maybe 50% of your time for the first year while you assess the regional operations. And of course, you'd need to be available for major clients. But that's just good business. 50% travel. Available for major clients, the familiar language of a life where work consumed everything else. "Ms. Walsh, can I ask how you got my number?" "Bob Hartwell gave it to us. He said you might be ready to get back into the business if the right opportunity came along." Bob. Of course it was Bob, still trying to lure me back into the world I'd abandoned. "I'll need to think about it," I said, though I already knew what my answer should be. "Of course. But, Mr. Harrison, I should mention that we need a decision by Monday. An opportunity like this won't wait indefinitely." Monday. 4 days to decide whether to return to the career that had nearly destroyed my family, or to continue the quiet life of presence and connection I'd been building for 8 months. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen trying to process what had just happened. $500,000 a year. Regional Vice President, the kind of position that would establish me as one of the most successful insurance executives in the Midwest. "Who was that?" Linda asked, coming downstairs with her hair still damp from the shower. "A job offer." I told her about the call, about the position, about the money. As I spoke, I watched her face carefully, looking for signs of what she was thinking. "That's a lot of money," she said when I finished. "It is. And a lot of travel. 50% for the first year, which means you'd be gone half the time, at least." Linda poured herself coffee and sat down at the kitchen table where we'd shared so many conversations over the past 8 months. Real conversations, not the rushed exchanges that had marked most of our marriage. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "Honestly, part of me is tempted, not by the money exactly, but by the recognition. The feeling of being wanted, being seen as valuable enough that companies compete for your services. And the other part? The other part remembers what it cost me the last time I thought work success was more important than family connection. Ted, can I tell you what I'm thinking? Please. I'm thinking that 8 months ago you wouldn't have even told me about this call. You would have taken the meeting, negotiated the terms, maybe even accepted the position before mentioning it to me. She was right. 8 months ago, I would have seen this as my decision to make, with Linda's role being to support whatever choice advanced my career. What does that tell you? I asked. It tells me you've really changed, but it also tells me that you're still vulnerable to the same temptations that derailed your priorities for 40 years. That afternoon I called Michael and told him about the job offer. His reaction was immediate and visceral. Dad, please tell me you're not seriously considering this. I'm trying to think it through rationally. Rationally. Dad, 8 months ago you were living in a motel because your family couldn't stand to be around you. 8 months ago, Mom had a heart attack from the stress of being married to a man who cared more about work than anything else. And now you're considering going back to that life. This would be different. I'm different. Are you? Because the fact that you're even tempted by this tells me that maybe you're not as different as we all thought. The conversation ended badly, with Michael angry and me defensive, but his words haunted me for the rest of the day. That evening, Danny came over for dinner while Michael and Sarah went to a movie. As we ate Linda's pot roast, he chatted about school, about soccer, about a science project he was working on about solar energy. "Grandpa Ted," he said as we cleared the table, "are you going back to work?" "What makes you ask that?" "Dad seemed upset when he picked me up from school. He said something to Mom about you getting a job offer." I looked at this 12-year-old boy who'd spent the past 8 months getting to know his grandfather for the first time in his life and felt the weight of what I was considering. "Danny, would it bother you if I went back to work?" He thought about it seriously, the way kids do when adults ask them real questions instead of just making conversation. "I guess it would depend," he said finally. "Depend on what?" "On whether you'd still have time for me. Whether you'd still come to my soccer games and help with my homework and just hang out sometimes. And if the job was really demanding, if it required a lot of travel and long hours." Danny's face fell slightly. "Then I guess you wouldn't have time for me anymore." "How would that make you feel?" "Sad, but also kind of used to it, I guess. Like, I'd remember that for a while I had a grandpa who was really there, and maybe that would be enough." The resignation in his voice, the same resignation I'd heard in Michael's voice 30 years earlier, broke my heart. That night, Linda and I lay in bed talking about the decision I was facing. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I want you to make the choice that aligns with who you've become, not who you used to be. And if I took the job, if I thought I could handle it differently this time, then I'd support you. But Ted, I'd also protect myself. I wouldn't go through another 30 years of competing with your career for your attention." "What does that mean?" "It means I'd probably ask you to move back to the guest room. It means I'd stop expecting you to be present for family dinners and conversations and the ordinary moments that make up a marriage. It means I'd go back to building a life that didn't depend on you being part of it." The thought of losing Linda again, of returning to the polite distance that had marked most of our marriage, made my stomach clench. "And if I don't take the job? Then we keep building what we've started. We keep being present for each other and for our family. We keep proving that love is more valuable than success." Friday morning I called Ms. Walsh back. "Mr. Harrison, I'm so glad you called. Have you made a decision?" "I have. I'm not interested in the position." "Mr. Harrison, I think you may be making a mistake. This is the kind of opportunity that could set you up for the rest of your career." "Ms. Walsh, I already have everything I need for the rest of my life. But the money alone, the money isn't worth it. Nothing is worth it if it costs me my family again." "Again? I spent 40 years choosing career advancement over the people I loved. I'm not making that mistake twice." After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not regret, not second thoughts, but pure relief that I'd chosen correctly without having to agonize over the decision. Linda found me on the back porch, reading a book about gardening that she'd recommended. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I passed a test I didn't know I was taking. The biggest test. The one that proves you've really changed." That weekend, Michael brought his family over for Sunday dinner. As we sat around the table that had hosted so many rushed meals and interrupted conversations over the years, I realized what we'd built in 8 months of choosing presence over productivity. We'd built intimacy, real knowledge of each other's thoughts, dreams, fears, and joys. We'd built trust that had been shattered by decades of broken promises and misplaced priorities. We'd built a family that actually enjoyed being together instead of just tolerating shared obligations. "Dad," Michael said as we cleaned up after dinner, "I heard you turned down the corporate dynamics job." "I did. Any regrets?" "None. Michael, I spent 40 years thinking that the next promotion, the next opportunity, the next level of success would finally make me happy. But you know what makes me happy?" "What?" "This. Sunday dinner with my family. Helping Danny with his homework, reading books that Linda recommends, having conversations that matter more than any business deal ever could. Even though you're not building anything, not achieving anything, I am building something. I'm building relationships. I'm building trust. I'm building a legacy that has nothing to do with money or recognition and everything to do with love." As my family prepared to leave that evening, Danny ran up to me with something in his hand. "Grandpa Ted, I made this for you in art class." It was a drawing of our family, stick figures holding hands in front of a house, with "The Harrisons" written in crayon across the top. In the picture, everyone was smiling, and there were no briefcases, no phones, no signs of the work that had once threatened to tear us apart. "It's beautiful, buddy. Thank you. I drew it because I wanted to remember what our family looks like now, when everyone's together and happy." Looking at that simple drawing, I realized that Danny had captured something profound. He'd drawn a family that existed in the present moment, not rushing toward the next achievement or distracted by external pressures. A family that had learned to value presence over productivity, connection over success. It was the most valuable thing anyone had ever given me, and unlike every promotion or commission or recognition I'd ever received, it was something that money couldn't buy and ambition couldn't earn. It was love, freely given, no strings attached. 1 year later, I was standing in the same spot where I'd found my belongings scattered across the front lawn, but this time I was hanging Christmas lights while Danny held the ladder and offered increasingly creative suggestions about where each strand should go. "Grandpa Ted, you missed a spot by the window," he called up to me, "and I think we need more lights on the mailbox, like a lot more lights." "More lights on the mailbox." I laughed, looking down at this 13-year-old boy who'd become one of my closest friends over the past year. "Danny, at this rate we're going to need our own power plant." "That would be cool. We could have the brightest house on the whole street." Linda appeared in the doorway, shaking her head at our ambitious decorating plans, but smiling in the way that had become familiar again, the smile of a woman who felt cherished instead of tolerated. "You two are going to burn out the electrical grid," she called out. "Ted, dinner's in 20 minutes. "We'll be right there," I called back, then climbed down from the ladder to admire our handiwork with Danny. The house looked ridiculous. Absolutely, gloriously ridiculous, with enough Christmas lights to be seen from space. It was exactly the kind of over-the-top decoration that the old Ted Harrison would have considered a waste of time and electricity. The new Ted Harrison thought it was perfect. "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" "Always, buddy." "Are you happy now? Like, really happy?" I looked at this boy who'd inherited his father's thoughtfulness and his mother's direct way of asking important questions. A year ago, he barely knew me. Now he was asking about my emotional state with the casual intimacy of someone who cared about the answer. "I'm happier than I've ever been in my life, Danny." "Why do you ask?" "Because last year, when everything was bad with Mom and Dad and you were living in that motel, everyone seemed sad all the time. But now everyone seems, I don't know, lighter, I guess. Lighter. It was the perfect word for what had happened to our family. We'd shed the weight of unmet expectations, broken promises, and the constant tension that comes from people who love each other but don't know how to show it. You're right. We are lighter. Do you know why? Because you and Dad learned how to be present. The phrase sounded sophisticated coming from a 13-year-old. But then again, Danny had lived through both versions of our family. He'd experienced what it felt like when the adults in his life were physically there, but emotionally absent, and he'd experienced what it felt like when they were truly present. That's exactly right. We learned that being present is the most important job any of us have. Michael's car pulled into the driveway, and I watched my son get out with the relaxed posture of a man who wasn't carrying the weight of unfinished work and unreturned phone calls. His accounting practice had grown steadily over the year, but he'd kept his promise to himself and his family about maintaining boundaries between work and life. "Dad, the house looks—" Michael paused, taking in the spectacular light display. Bright, very, very bright. "Danny's artistic vision," I said proudly. I was just the manual labor. "It's awesome." Danny ran to his father. "Wait till you see it when it gets dark. Grandpa Ted let me design the whole pattern." Sarah emerged from the passenger seat, and I felt the familiar gratitude I experienced whenever I saw her smile at me. It had taken months for her to trust that the changes in our family were real and permanent, but somewhere around summer she'd stopped looking at me like I might revert to my old patterns at any moment. "Uncle Ted," she said, giving me a hug that felt natural instead of obligatory. "Linda said you made your famous chili for dinner." Uncle Ted. Not Mr. Harrison, not even Ted, but Uncle Ted, the designation she'd started using when she decided I'd earned a place in her family's inner circle. "Famous might be overstating it," I said, "but I did follow your grandmother's recipe exactly." "Mom's coming by later," Michael said, as we walked toward the house. "She wanted to see the light display and have dessert with everyone." Mom, Michael's mother-in-law, had started including me in family gatherings after watching me show up consistently for Danny's soccer games and school events. Another relationship rebuilt through the simple act of being present. Dinner that night was what dinner had become in our house over the past year, a relaxed, lingering affair where conversation flowed naturally and no one checked their phone because no one had anywhere more important to be. "Grandpa Ted," Danny said as Linda served her homemade apple pie, "will you tell the story again about when you found your stuff on the lawn?" It had become one of Danny's favorite stories, though Linda and I had edited it significantly for a 13-year-old audience. In Danny's version, it was a tale of redemption, where a grandfather learned to choose love over work, and everyone lived happily ever after. The real version was more complicated, but the ending was the same. "Well," I began, settling into the familiar rhythm of a story I'd told dozens of times, "your grandfather was so focused on his job that he forgot how to be part of his family." As I told the story, I looked around the table at these faces that had become dear to me in ways I'd never imagined possible. Linda, listening with the patient smile of someone who'd heard this story many times but never tired of its message. Michael and Sarah, holding hands across the table in the unself-conscious way of couples who'd weathered a crisis and come out stronger. Danny, hanging on every word even though he knew exactly how it ended. "And that's when Grandpa Ted learned the most important lesson of his life," I concluded. "What lesson?" Danny asked, right on cue. "That love isn't something you earn through achievement. It's something you nurture through presence." After dinner, we all went outside to see the Christmas lights in their full glory. The house was, indeed, spectacular, a blazing testament to the collaborative efforts of a grandfather and grandson who'd had nothing but time to plan the perfect holiday display. "It's beautiful," Linda said, slipping her hand into mine as we stood on the sidewalk admiring our handiwork. "It's excessive," I corrected. "Same thing." As the evening wound down and Michael's family prepared to leave, Danny ran back to me with something he'd forgotten to give me earlier. "Grandpa Ted, this is for you. I made it in woodshop class." It was a small wooden plaque with words burned into the surface. "The most important things in life aren't things. Danny, this is beautiful. Where did you learn this saying? From you. You said it last month when I was upset about not getting the expensive soccer cleats that some of the other kids have. You said the most important things in life aren't things, they're people and relationships and being present for each other. I turned the plaque over and found more words on the back. For Grandpa Ted, who learned what matters most. Standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, holding a gift made by the grandson who barely knew me a year ago, I felt something I'd never experienced in 40 years of professional success. Complete contentment. Not the temporary satisfaction that comes from closing a big deal or getting a promotion, but the deep, lasting peace that comes from knowing your life has meaning beyond your achievements. Thank you, Danny. This is the best gift I've ever received. Better than your trophy for being Salesman of the Year? So much better I can't even compare them. After they left, Linda and I sat on the front porch swing, wrapped in blankets and looking at our ridiculous Christmas light display. Any regrets, she asked, the question that had become our evening ritual. About what? About the corporate dynamics job? About the money we could have had, the status you could have achieved? I thought about it seriously, as I did every time she asked. None. Linda, I have everything I ever really wanted. I just didn't know I wanted it until I almost lost it. What do you want now? More of this, more evenings like tonight, more conversations like this, more time with Danny before he grows up and stops thinking his grandfather is interesting. More years with you, building on what we've created instead of taking it for granted. And if someone offered you another high-powered job, something even better than corporate dynamics, I'd tell them I already have the most important job in the world, which is being present for the people I love. As we prepared for bed that night in the room we'd fully reclaimed as our shared space, Linda asked me one more question. Ted, what do you think would have happened if I hadn't thrown you out, if I'd just kept tolerating the way things were? We would have stayed married, I said without hesitation, but we wouldn't have been happy. You would have continued feeling invisible. I would have continued choosing work over family, and Michael would have repeated all my mistakes with Danny. So in a way, throwing you out saved our family. In a way, yes. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what you actually have. I turned off the lights and settled beside my wife, listening to her breathing and feeling grateful for the ordinary miracle of her presence. Outside, our Christmas lights continued their cheerful blinking, visible to anyone driving down Maple Street, as a sign that this house contained a family that had learned to celebrate being together. 1 year ago, I'd been a 65-year-old man living in a motel, wondering if it was too late to change the patterns of a lifetime. Now I was a 66-year-old man who'd learned that it's never too late to choose love over achievement, presence over productivity, relationships over recognition. The note Michael had left on the door that terrible October day had said, "I can't do this anymore. I can't watch you destroy yourself and take Mom with you." Tonight, I could have written him a different note. I finally learned how to be the father and husband you deserved all along. Thank you for not giving up on me entirely. But I didn't need to write that note, because I'd been showing it to my family every day for the past year, through presence, through consistency, through the daily choice to put love first. The cycle was broken, the pattern was changed, and the most important things in life, the people who loved me and the relationships that gave life meaning, were finally receiving the attention they'd always deserved. In the darkness of our bedroom, Linda's hand found mine across the sheets, and I fell asleep, holding on to the woman who'd saved my life by refusing to settle for less than I was capable of giving. Some stories end with dramatic gestures and grand declarations. This one ended with the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd finally learned that the most important thing you can give the people you love is the gift of your complete, undivided presence. It turned out that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.